Okay, welcome back to the Blair Technique podcast. This is going to be sort of a bonus episode. We've got a special guest that a lot of you folks might not be familiar with. It's a new friend of mine. We were just talking here offline before we started recording. It's Dr. Arthur Plesa. He's a knee chest doc in Charlotte, North Carolina. I got connected with Dr. Plesa because I came across his podcast, the Green Book commentaries. And so really excited to have him on the show today. We're going to talk about who he is, where he's from, what he's up to. And I'd love to introduce our community to Dr. Plessa's work here with the Green Book commentaries, because I think you all find it very valuable. Really, really cool project that he's got going on. So, Doc, thanks for making the time with us this morning. And I'd love for you to, before we start to get into some of the content there, introduce yourself to our Blair Technique family and how you got into chiropractic, maybe your journey into upper cervical care, and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. First off, it's a pleasure and an honor to be on the Blair podcast. For those who don't know me, my name is Dr. Arthur Plesa. I am a 2008 Life University alumni. How I got originally involved in the chiropractic was through my father. He was actually a chiropractic patient for a number of years. Back in his late 20s, he had taken a back injury and had suffered a severe low back disc problem that had caused him crippling sciatica on and off for about 20 plus years till he finally discovered chiropractic. He had discovered a chiropractor, of course, and I went with a few visits with him just to kind of see what it was all about because I was just interested. And the chiropractor was the type of doctor that didn't really say much. He just kind of brought the patient in, get them checked up, adjusted, and people would walk out doing better. And I was just left as, a 12, 13-year-old boy. How the heck did that happen? Well, how did my dad come in here almost in a wheelchair, gets adjusted and walks out walking like he's almost fine and gets back to work? And he's an electrician, does a lot of manual labor.
Yeah.
So after I saw my father's recovery through severe sciatica, which even saved him from low back surgery, it not only impressed me a lot, but it inspired me to want to do that. So I had went to an orientation at Life University back in 2001, fell in love with what I heard and really just got turned on to the message that they were talking about. Being the only profession that can actually help people get well, stay well, and naturally. I mean, to me, it was just awesome. I had always been interested into science, healthcare, but didn't exactly know what I wanted to do. So this orientation really just spoke right to my heart. So I had enrolled as a student, went through the program, and just really fell in love with the profession. What got me into upper cervical, though, was literally within my first year of school, we had two adjusting technique courses, full spine diversified and side posture toggle. And side posture toggle was, of course, our first introduction to upper cervical. I had an awesome professor. His name was Dr. Richard Franz.
Dr. Franz, yeah. I was in his
I
was in his last toggle course that he taught.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So you know who I'm talking about.
Awesome guy. Yeah.
I didn't really know his background until towards the end of my education when I actually spent more time with him in his office. But apparently he was a Kale knee chest upper cervical doctor, had done a lot of work with Dr. Kale, a lot of research with him. I mean, the guy was a wealth of knowledge that I got a lot of my initial knee chest upbringing with, so to speak, before I got involved with KCUCS. So my first introduction to upper cervical was actually that course and reading volume 18. That was actually my first chiropractic book I had ever laid hands on, even knew what it was about. And I remember just reading that book going through class and just fell in love with it. I'm always a man of science. I loved the science classes going through school. So when I started reading volume 18, it was really the science of chiropractic condensed into about 800 pages. It was amazing to me to read this stuff. And of course, to read that, we're actually getting sick people well. It's something that they kind of briefly talked about at school when I was there, but it's, pretty much when you were there like I was there to take your exams and get through your boards. You didn't really talk a lot of hardcore chiropractic outside of your technique clubs,
right,
your philosophy clubs, and your things outside of class, which was odd to me. So I discovered chiropractic really in one class, and then a lot of alone time I'd spent reading the books and discovering the green books that we had over there at the Palmer room in our library, if you remember that little broom closet room.
Yeah.
We had probably about half of them over there that I spent reading through the entire time my career at Life University. And they all just really led me to one thing, the upper cervical spine. Even the old full spine books, before upper cervical got instituted into Palmer, they were pushing a lot towards the upper neck, atlas axis, cord pressure, cord tension. They just hadn't developed it yet.
Yeah.
So when you read all those books, prior to volume 18 in retrospect, you can see where they're going to. You can see what they're pointing to and how the science all points to that area. So upper cervical really attracted me a lot due to the fact that this is where the science of our profession had really developed from. All chiropractic techniques, for the most part, add some aspect of science to our profession and something to add to it. But I believe what gave us our strong foundation, that we actually have something to build off of, was the work that was developed by BJ Palmer through his research years, through, of course, which every upper cervical technique was based off of, from knee, chest to side posture adjusting into the techniques that we have today.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, yeah, thinking back, I didn't even learn about that special collections room until I'd almost graduated. So spent the last couple quarters digging through there, and on the top shelf up there, they actually have files from the BJ Palmer Research Clinic where you can
Yeah.
thumb through the scans and look at the spinographs and
Oh, yeah.
kind of see the records and things like that. It's just some living history hidden right there in the library that most folks never even realize is right there. So, I remember back to being in school. It was I'd started the quarter after Dr. Sid Williams had passed away, and I knew
Mm-hmm.
nothing about chiropractic. And I got there, and it was this whole thing about Dr. Williams and the legacy of chiropractic and all these things, and it totally caught me off guard. And then getting into your first technique class, toggle recoil with Dr. Franz, and him explaining some of the lineage of the technique, and
Yeah.
having your first exposure to analysis and correction, and being exposed to the green books and the science that was being developed concurrently with the philosophy and the art. And it's just such a fascinating journey that a lot of us have, with a similar sort of trajectory, especially in the, I guess if you want to call the vitalistic schools, where we are
Mm-hmm.
fortunate enough to have had access to that early on, and the support to continue to pursue that, later on.
Yeah.
So besides Dr. Franz, who are your mentors in chiropractic? Now that you got out of school, what were the next steps for you?
Well, I've got to give respect to one more clinician back when I was at Life University that really put me on a good track. He's actually a Blair chiropractor. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, Dr. Ralph Davis.
Oh, yeah.
He was my student clinician, kind of the head of the student clinic back when I was in student clinic over there. And back then we weren't doing knee chest. All I had available was either diversified or full or toggle that you could do in student clinic. So I was
Right.
doing toggle at the time, and he was a Blair guy. He was trying to get me into Blair. Said, they're very similar techniques. It just one's a little bit more detailed than the other. So I was really getting interested into Blair at that time. But his conversations with me were not really so much more technique orientated as they were focusing on the opposite end of a practice, which is the practice management side, kind of the
Got it.
business aspect. I remember one of the most important things I learned from him was he told me, no matter how good you get at adjusting an atlas subluxation and clearing that line, if you don't know how to communicate the value of what you do to your patient for lifetime care and maintenance, you're going to be adjusting nobody. You're going to be the best chiropractor in an empty clinic.
Wow.
And I didn't understand that concept then, because I was your typical student thinking all I had to do was be the best adjuster, hang my sign out the door, and all of a sudden all of the city is going to flood into Dr. Plesa's office. So yeah, definitely a lot of respect to that chiropractor, because he put me on the track of actually exploring the options of practice management. That is something you critically need in today's chiropractic world. So after school, kind of moving on beyond that, my two biggest mentors were within my own technique of KCUCS. First and foremost was Dr. Robert Kessinger, the founder of the technique. He's literally where I learned adjusting from. I've done knee chest adjusting mission trips with him, adjusted side by side with him. He's just a good, awesome, sincere doctor who wants to see other chiropractors and other students do well in this profession. I think he's like a third generation guy coming down the line. I think his grandfather, great grandfather were trained by BJ Palmer. So he's got a pretty cool lineage.
Yeah.
My second big mentor is another KCUCS doctor, an instructor as well, Dr. Henri Dalius. Actually worked as an associate doctor for him. He practices in Hendersonville, North Carolina. So just about 2 hours west of us here. And while I got a lot of my knee chest technique fine-tuned with him over the years of working with him, what really took my practice off was learning, again, the practice management aspect. And not just practice management, but specific for an upper cervical practice.
Right.
So to have the pleasure and the ability to work in a high volume office like his, see a lot of patients, and just create a good value for what we do on upper cervical, and specifically our technique. So yeah, Dr. Kessinger and Dr. Dalius are definitely two of my biggest influencers and biggest role models that I look up to even to today.
Yeah, Dr. Kessinger is a close friend of the Blair community. He's definitely, I believe I was telling you beforehand, he's going to be on the speaker rotation at this year's annual Blair conference. So really
Yes, I
excited to have
heard.
him. Love when, every time these guys come around and really uh, help us up our game in the thermography aspect of the Blair work. It's one
Hmm.
thing that I think we can do a better job of just as a technique organization is getting everyone on the same page regarding the thermography
Yes,
aspect of our assessment.
completely.
And it's such an invaluable tool. I think if we can demystify, some of the common errors that folks make and not having the proper
Oh,
pattern in the first place, and then what to do with it subsequently. So really
exactly.
excited what he's going to share. You guys have, dialed that in very, very nicely, and so we appreciate the work that you've done there. Now, talk to me about this Green Book Commentaries podcast and how did this all come about? And walk us through the thought process with I want to read volume 8, volume 25 out loud in a series of podcasts.
So the Green Book commentaries, I began this last year. I think it was the summer, June or July of 2020. It was just a few short months after COVID hit. In Charlotte over here, it wasn't hardcore lockdown, but everybody was terrified.
Sure.
A lot of patients were calling to reschedule. We had a lot of open availabilities in our clinic, and I was literally just sitting around like, what the heck's going on? So I had a little bit of available time on my hands, and just went back to reading a few of my green books that kind of keep my energy, keep my momentum going, even though the practice had slowed down. And NA gave me the idea. Well, you're probably not the only one affected by COVID, are you? You're one of numerous chiropractors and newly graduated people sitting around right now trying to decide what's going to happen with your practice and where you're going to go. So it came to me that let's put this together in a podcast format to let other people become exposed to it. Because I find a lot of students I speak to, even chiropractors that have been in the profession for a number of years, really depending on where they graduated from, if they've even heard of a green book.
Yeah.
I know some chiropractors that have graduated, say, from Western states. I don't even think that's introduced to them. A
Yeah.
green book it's an alien idea to these people. So being able to introduce them to some of the greatest work written in our profession by definitely one of the greatest chiropractors, if not the greatest one, the developer of our chiropractic, for me was it's an honor and a pleasure to be able to do so. I've always loved the green books going back to myself as a student and was just trying to struggle to find time to read that much green books during studies, boards, exams, and all that stuff. So I took the challenge that I had and tried to create a solution for the next generation, and that nobody's ever done a podcast for this. Nobody's ever read the green books out in this format before and provided a commentary so that people that are new to it or have no idea of the profession during that time in history can kind of have a sense of concept of what's going on. What are they actually reading? One funny thing was I actually had no idea. You may be familiar, Dr. Joseph Strauss. Apparently, he
Yeah.
did a book version of this, of all the green books back in his day, called the Green Book Commentaries.
Yes, he
I
does. Yeah.
had no idea about. When I first tried to come up with an idea for the podcast, I Googled the names and nothing came up for the Green Book Commentary podcast. So I'm like, great, I've got an awesome title. About a month or two later, a friend of mine sends me a copy of Dr. Strauss's book, The Green Book Commentaries.
He's got volumes of them. They're blue.
Yeah, the blue books. I'm just like, face palm the head. I'm like, oh Lord. I hope Dr. Strauss doesn't get offended, but either way.
Yeah. I think it's interesting observing that same phenomenon. A lot of people have opinions about Dr. Palmer and have never read any of his work.
Yeah.
And I've always found that to be very, very ironic. It's like a lot of the conversations going on today in the upper cervical community about things like the cerebral spinal hydrodynamics and internal jugular vein compression and some of these advanced concepts are not brand new concepts. These are not things that he was not considering and thinking about and talking about at the time. And
Yeah.
we've got updated technology, so we can start to approach these things a little bit differently from a scientific point of view, but the concepts are well established and have been around for a very long time. So let's introduce
Completely.
folks. Hate that we have to do this, but let's just introduce folks to what volume 25 is. So in the green books, you've got
Oh, you got yours right
40
there. Good for
volumes
you,
there.
my
I've got
friend.
my copy of volume 25 here. It's a good read. I've got it all
I can
tabbed
tell
up.
you have a few of your highlights in there, so you definitely read
Chiropractic
it once or
clinical
twice.
controlled research. Okay, so could you walk us through, and this is 1951, correct?
Yes.
Walk us through what this book is all about. Why did Dr. Palmer put this together?
Okay. Volume 25, Chiropractic Clinical Control Research, was published in 1951, as you've just mentioned. Out of the nearly 40 Green Book volumes written, if I could single out one and for some reason say all the other ones did not exist, but just keep one, I would keep volume 25. Now, why is that so? Because everything written prior to 1951, prior to volume 25, was included into that book.
Hmm.
Anything after 51, you had very little development of chiropractic technique after 51. The only other thing that was produced by the Palmer School was the Thompson drop head piece
Right.
after 1951. It was basically just more expanding upon the philosophy, and the volumes got a little bit smaller. The thoughts got a little bit more concise. It's almost like B.J. Palmer hit his magnum opus with volume 25.
Hmm.
Every upper cervical person will usually point to volume 18 as their bread and butter. And I like that one. But the problem with it is it's only a starting point. It's
Yeah.
the first one in the volume that builds up from that point. And it's before pattern analysis even got developed. So
Right.
they were just doing typical break analysis of the upper cervical area, no pattern. It just, if it broke more than 2 points, you adjust it. It was a great start, and a night and day difference from the general full spine adjusting they were doing in the 1920s.
Sure.
But what developed after the 1930s going to the 1940s is what we see with volume 25. Volume 25 is literally anything chiropractic you can think about from day one to 1951. BJ takes the reader from 1895. There were only 3 people there, him, his father, and Harvey Lillard. And he details what happened. Now, there's a little discrepancy from him to Dee, but again, he tells us the story of what happened. And then how chiropractic developed within the first 10 years from, the crude adjustments they were doing. A lot of people don't know, but we used to put 100-pound sandbags on our shoulders to adjust patients with. Thinking back in those olden days, it was just brute force to get the bone to move. Then we see the advancement of different analysis going from palpation to the Merrick system, then the first scientific objective tool, which we had, was X-ray in 1910. And then following with the neurocolometer, so on and so forth. Volume 25 is really the history of the development of chiropractic. So anybody who really wants to understand the profession, where we came from, where we are, and really where we're headed, you can look at that volume and literally see the whole profession, and even where it's going 60 years ago when that book was written now. Volume 25 is just fantastic. It breaks into so many sub-chapters, you can say. One of my favorite ones that I really just got turned on to again this year was reading Dr. Crowell's medical research work. George Washington Crowell in there, The Bipolar Theory of Life.
Uh-huh.
The first few times I read volume 25, I would kind of skip over that or just breeze through it. Yeah, very good medical research. BJ's just supporting his theory for nerve pressure causing the heat.
Right.
But going back to that now, it's interesting to find out that it's actually the nerves that produce the heat. Chiropractors were the first to say this, that nerves heated the body, whereas the medical profession claimed it was the blood.
Mm-hmm.
And it was Dr. Crowell's work, a medical doctor, researcher back in the 20s, who did research on rabbits, putting electrodes on their vascular system here, measuring blood temperature before and after it would leave the brain, and actually found that the blood going into the brain was cooler than the blood going out of the brain. So the brain, being the master generator of electrical heat, electrical energy, should naturally heat up that blood. So when it comes out and you measure it in the venous system, it'll be hotter. So the idea was that, yes, nerves do produce heat. Subluxation does produce a nerve pressure heat. So that's one thing I really loved about reading that again, because it backs up what BJ was saying, that a lot of people now are saying it's just the blood again. It's heated blood, heated capillaries. Well, there's some value to that. The underlying cause will always go back to the nervous system, I believe.
Very cool. Yeah. So you set out to basically share this volume. You've obviously derived so much value from it in within your community. Likewise. So why podcast format? What was it that drew you to just sitting down in bite-sized chunks reading this thing out loud?
It just seemed like the most logical and the most efficient way of doing it. When I tried to come up with different formats, maybe like write it and post it on a website. My whole goal was I wanted people to be able to listen to this, even if they're on the run, if they're doing long distance drives. And as a student, I'm sure like most are, I did a lot of seminars as a student. So I was doing hours of driving literally every month, from technique to practice management, anything I could find my hands that I would find value in developing my practice, I did. So I just wanted students, doctors who, like me, do a lot of driving, do a lot of seminars, to have something valuable to listen to stay on fire for our profession. So I found that a podcast, in the form of an Audible, was the best method to reach the audience, have them become engaged and interact them so that they actually understand what they're listening to.
Yeah, it's so easily accessible. I mean, with that technology, you think back to Dr. Palmer and the printing press and the world of chiropractic radio station, all the different media formats that he was involved with, I mean, there would have been innumerable podcasts coming out of Davenport, Iowa.
I
With
can only imagine nowadays. Yeah.
so it makes sense that we leverage that technology to meet folks where they're at in a way that's really accessible. So if you go on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast, search the Green Book Commentaries. You'll find it right away. Go ahead and subscribe to that. Each episode is probably, we aim for like 30 minutes, between 30 minutes or less. Each individual subchapter, just a little snippet. So you're not going to have to sit and listen through 8 hours, solid of nonstop. They're nice bite-sized chunks so that in your commute, even to work and back and forth, you can get a little something and it'll get you thinking. And you can even listen to them on a little bit faster speed if you have to, because Dr. Plesa does a great job of going very articulately through the different articles and chapters. So definitely check that out. I think we could all benefit from that endeavor. What are you hoping that folks will take away from your podcast? If you were to have your way, and looking back on this project when it's completed, what would make you feel really good about the way that it turned out?
There's two things I really take a lot of value from in the Green Books. First off is the science. This is where the science of our profession really developed its foundation. Everything that you and I do today is because of what they were doing back then. So anytime I hear, somebody new in the profession or students say that, oh, there's not a lot of science behind what we do. Well, maybe nobody's producing a lot of good science now, but let's look back in your grandparents' generation. I guarantee you what they were doing then was groundbreaking.
Yeah.
So one thing I really want people to take away from, first off, is the scientific aspect of chiropractic. Chiropractic is a solid science that gets sick people well. You just have to know how to find the subluxation and be skilled enough at adjusting it, and then be smart enough to know when to stop. Second, I love the philosophy of chiropractic. The philosophy of chiropractic just resonates with me personally as who I am in my spiritual life, and it really just connects the spirit to the body. And I find that understanding chiropractic philosophy is really what keeps us as chiropractors long-term, keeps the fire going, keeps the fire alive. Because without chiropractic philosophy, we're really nothing more than technicians. We're just moving bones around from point A to point B, hearing the pops, hearing the cracks, and getting a high five when the patient says they feel better. It's rewarding, but it's shallow to me in the end.
Yeah.
The chiropractic philosophy is really where the depth of our profession comes from and can stem amazingly from that point. We are the only profession that acknowledges there's a life force within mankind. The only, right? I love what BJ Palmer used to say. Medical doctors deny the spirit 6 days of the week and then reaffirm it on Sunday, when they go to church. So that's what I love about the philosophy of chiropractic. It really allows me to unite what I believe in my spiritual life to what we are physically, and that there is a spirit, there is a soul, there's a life energy within us that works through the brain, through the nervous system, and a subluxation is the one major thing that stops it from being able to do so. So when we adjust our patients, this is what gets me up in the morning and keeps me excited to that last patient at 6 o'clock at night. At each person I get to adjust, we get to help reconnect their innate intelligence to their body, get to help them be well, and whatever they want to do in life at that point, they're not inhibited. They're not interfered with because of subluxation.
Beautiful. Yeah. And is this something that you're talking about with patients? How are you introducing them to chiropractic principles and thoughts?
It's a process, as you know, in practice, it takes time, right? You're not going to get it in one visit. This is why you have to have a good practice management system to help build your patients over the course of visits, not just 3 or 4 visits. I mean, just think about when we were in school. Did you really learn everything about chiropractic in 1 year?
You're so true.
That's so true. I learned how to take some tests. I learned what some basic anatomy and physiology was, and I think I understood what a subluxation might have been. So the way with our patients, think of it like the minute hand turning on an hourly clock, right? When it starts at 12 o'clock, goes to 3, down to 6, around to 9, then back up to 12. Our goal is not to shotgun the approach, go from what they think chiropractic is to a complete 180 in one visit. Most people can't connect with that. I wouldn't have been able to connect with that. So it's a slow process of meeting them where they're at, getting them to understand that there's a cause behind their problem, which is the subluxation. What causes that subluxation? What are the effects of that subluxation beyond just the physical aspect? We'll touch a lot of mental and emotional problems that can connect with subluxation, and that right there just removes the person from the physical aspect and gets them thinking, hey, there's something else going on over here. And we'll introduce the term innate intelligence to them. They get comfortable with it. They know about it. And, most people acknowledge there's something like this. We call it innate intelligence. Every culture has its name for it. There's
Sure.
very few cultures of people that say, nope, there's nothing within us. We're just meat and bones and then we die. Well, you know what? If you have that innate intelligence conversation with that meat and bones person, you're going to still come out better than they will because you believe more than they do, and your results speak for themselves. So it's just it's a day by day, visit by visit process of just ingraining our patients into what chiropractic is, what it does, what it doesn't, and tie that all back to innate intelligence, just to keep them excited about their care. That, listen, this is more than just what I came in for.
And the great thing about Dr. Palmer's work, and like you said, blending the science and the art and the philosophy concurrently as that developed, I think that's one of the most underrated aspects of the development of chiropractic. Everywhere in the business world and in, the entrepreneurial space, the conversation is start with why, develop a vision, what's the culture of your business, and all these types of conversations that have all of a sudden, reflected the need for a philosophy of what you're doing and why you're doing it to anchor you to a true north. And we have that, that was built in.
Yes,
And I always thought it was kind of funny that that there's been almost, a diversion away from the philosophy that we were sort of grounded in foundationally. And we talk about this with some of the old school Blair docs, the ones that have been trained by first generation, Dr. Blair and his contemporaries. And there was just an understanding that they had about these principles that they might not have had to have these conversations in the way that we do now, because it was so ingrained within every bit of, what they knew to be chiropractic, right? There wasn't, I guess there were always straights and mixers, but they all had an awareness of Dr. Palmer's work, the philosophy of chiropractic, and they had legendary, philosophical chiropractors training them.
Yes.
Not having, MDs or PhDs training them in biochemistry, having chiropractors biochemistry that explains, and weaves that into the conversation about body performance, body function, and how things work. So I really admire the, we always talk about how rock solid those folks were, and we always want to emulate their results. And we always want to work towards, their results. But as you were just saying previously, if we just simply follow the steps without the conviction behind it, then you're a technician and the results will not be, at that same level. So glad that you made that distinction. I hope that folks that are maybe a little bit, for lack of a better word, uncomfortable with philosophy, maybe they come to upper cervical care for different reasons, and have, maybe stayed away from the philosophical constructs or some of the philosophical topics, or maybe they have heard, chiropractors outside of the upper cervical community maybe using and abusing chiropractic philosophy in a way that is maybe inappropriate and doesn't resonate with their values. I would encourage you to reapproach that. And I think volume 25 is a perfect way to do that, because it's going to scratch the itch that you have for the science and the case management and some of the different aspects of what makes us love upper cervical work. We were talking just before we started recording there about Colonel Allen's story. For folks that have not read 25, could you briefly summarize who is Colonel Allen and what that's all about? Because I would really love for folks to, if nothing else, pick this up and start there, so that you can get a taste of what it's all about.
Absolutely, I'd love to. The funny thing is that's actually the first story I read in volume 25. Going back to my days at Life University at the Palmer room, the broom closet room, I called it. When I discovered volume 25, I just kind of, thumbed through it to see if there were any cool pictures to check out, anything like that. And the few pictures were of patients in there, his patient cases. Colonel Allen was a patient of B.J. Palmer back in the early 1940s. He was actually a student of chiropractic at Palmer School prior to enrolling in the military for World War II service. In World War II service, he got called or drafted and served in Europe. Colonel Allen was doing training in Europe and had fallen, twisted his ankle, and fell back and hurt himself. He had woken up the next morning with scarlet fever, which means his skin had turned red, had the red bumps, and just had a severe fever. A few days later, he really took a downturn and had developed jaundice. The medical doctors had done an exam on him, done blood work, and found out that he had an obstruction of his gallbladder duct, and as a result, was not being able to get bile to come through. So they did exploratory surgery and found out that he had a cancerous tumor that was causing this problem. They said that basically there was nothing medicine that could do for him, sent him back home to America to make good with his wife and family and prepare to die. Well, when he got back home, him being a chiropractor, being trained by BJ Palmer, knew where to go. He went straight to Davenport, Iowa, and checked in there at the clinic, and basically got a full upper cervical workup. In a period of about 6 weeks, you can see there in volume 25, the actual numbers of his bilirubin go from like the high sevens down to within normal levels. And what this all indicates in blood work for medical diagnostics is that he was cancer-free. His condition cleared up. He got his strength to get back, got his energy back so good that he was able to go back and serve in World War II at the Battle of the Bulge, which was one of the deadliest, most bloodiest battles during World War II. Somehow survived, came back to the States, got checked up one more time about a year later after that first adjustment, his one and only adjustment, might I add, and was still clear. So this is what I love about cases like this, to hear of the potential of what one adjustment can do and what one good adjustment can really do to get to stay in place for a long period of time, and really how sick people get well. And yes, even patients with cancer can get well.
And any of our friends and colleagues that have trained in the orthogonal techniques, that story sounds familiar to what they've heard from Dr. Grostek's history with upper cervical care, and had a very similar experience at the BJ clinic, and went into remission on multiple occasions when he had his atlas corrected.
Didn't he have, he had Hodgkin's, I believe, didn't he?
Lymphoma, yeah.
Yeah, he had a very aggressive form. So I remember hearing Dr. Grostek's story too, got adjusted by BJ and got well as well. So we have an amazing technique in upper cervical, and I think they all do awesome work. Our goal is to see if we can clear that subluxation and clear that pattern scan. We find if that's the one objective tool, if we can get that cleared, everything else begins to clear very well over time, and sick people get very well, even of cancer.
Excellent. Let's talk about thermography then. I know this is a little bit off script for what we planned on talking about, but I'd love to, from your point of view, if you were to talk to some of our Blair family that's maybe not as proficient or comfortable with the use of thermography, why you find that to be such an important diagnostic tool for the clinical practice of chiropractic, and if you were to explain, I guess in layman's terms, if you were describing to a patient, what are we doing with this scan here? What does this mean when we're getting adjustment, when I'm out of adjustment versus not, and some of how that integrates within your patient communication?
Sure. So let's break that up into two portions. First, we'll talk about the significance of thermography, especially to the chiropractic community, especially those that have either used a little bit of it or are not familiar one bit whatsoever with it. And then I'll answer the question on how to discuss it with patients.
Excellent.
Now, in regards towards our profession, spinal thermography is the science of measuring subluxation nerve heat. Anytime you have a subluxation, there's pressure on the spinal cord or spinal nerves. That produces a resistance to the transmission of electrical energy from the brain down through the body. Just like an electrical short in an electrical panel that you have in your house, wherever that point of resistance is, produces more heat. Heat is given off at that point of interference. And you can actually measure this in an electrical circuit using an electric meter. Now, in the human body, we don't put an electric meter to it. What we have is we can measure the heat emission given off by the nervous system through the skin. We have spinal thermography tools. The one I use in my office is from the company Titron. There's a few other different ones, but that is definitely my preferred one, and the preferred one for most upper cervical practices.
Right.
It uses infrared thermography to take a temperature scan of the back of a patient's spine. You can do full spine scans. Typically, you'll just do cervical scans for visit-to-visit basis. And anytime you have a subluxation, it produces a constant heat pattern. Think of it like when you have hypertension. Right, you go into the cardiologist, you get a blood pressure check, and that number stays high consistently. Not once, not twice, but consistently. If it raises once or twice, maybe you ran up the stairs to get you your doctor's visit, right? Or you had a stressful day. Your blood pressure will raise with that. We're not concerned with the variance. We're concerned with the constant nature of subluxation. And anytime you've got a subluxation, research shows you scan somebody with that scan, it forms a very similar heat pattern each and every time with very little variation. The character looks the same, just the intensity may change. So this is really the only scientific, objective tool we have in our profession to measure subluxation. Now, the next step is leg check. I came from side posture toggle adjusting before I got into knee chest, and I was doing Titron and leg checks then, but I didn't know Titron too much then, so I was doing more value in the leg check. We got a lot of good results with that, and I was just a student clinician. Legs were balancing, people were getting well, and there's a lot of value to that. But what BJ Palmer found in his research was that the most sensitive and the most specific test we have is that scan. so that when a subluxation occurs, a patient can have that pattern present itself, but the legs just haven't become unbalanced yet. So what BJ reasoned from that was that there's a time period that occurs between when a subluxation happens in the upper neck and that righting reflex will occur to actually draw significant leg short.
Hmm.
So he found times that they matched up together and sometimes that they didn't. So the value was always put on the scan first over the leg check. Again, keep in mind, BJ was trying to go towards more scientific, more objective tools, instrumentation, in other words.
Sure.
Not that there wasn't value in leg checks. It's just that they weren't objectified like a scan could be. You could play with the leg checks if you wanted. You can pull one leg a little bit more, be a little dishonest. That scan, you can't lie with that thing. It's like hooking somebody up to an EKG, So that scan is really the most sensitive, the most specific test we have in our profession, and it is not technique specific. That's the cool thing I love about thermography. However, with that said, it will lead you to certain techniques when done properly, because that's really how BJ got to where he did.
Yeah.
Before upper cervical, BJ was doing full spine. The majority of full spine techniques that people do today, from Gonstead to Thompson to Diversified, were originally developed by BJ. And he tested all those techniques against that neurocoulometer, that spinal thermography scan. The ones that would show reduction of nerve pressure heat were considered a value. The ones that showed no change, it would just get the bones to move, pop, and crack. He said, these are just manipulative moves. We don't need to worry about these anymore. So he got to refining chiropractic technique. This is how he got to the upper cervical through this technique, through this spinal thermography. So we'll always find that it's going to be one of these specific upper cervical techniques that will always consistently get that scan to clear and hold long. Back when I was in school, I messed around just to see if I could, and I did like a supine rotary break at Atlas for one of my patients just to play with it, and I scanned him and it cleared. I said, "Oh my God, BJ was wrong." The patient came in 2 days later, scanned again, and they were in pattern.
Yeah, there you go.
No, he wasn't wrong. Some can get it to change. Some can't even get it to clear. But the holding power, that's really the end result. Yeah. Which one can get it to hold the longest to get that innate intelligence to heal the body through a non-subluxated body faster?
I'm glad you said that, because I always joke with a few of my friends that any chiropractor can balance legs. Everybody's doing that, but there aren't that many that are clearing the scans, right?
Bingo.
And so the proof is in the pudding, and I think that's what makes some folks a little bit nervous to approach it. Sure. But on that same topic, I had a patient just this week that I saw who came for her initial workup back in January, had an orthopedic issue that had to be taken care of, came back, her subsequent scan, dead ringer 3 months later of her original pattern had not been adjusted. And it just made me stop and think that, you hear people say this, that pattern is a pattern, and it will reemerge. And, it makes you think of how static her physiology has been for the last 3 months without having that adjustment, and being able to measure a change then post adjustment and see that, even that soon we've made a positive adaptive change in her neurophysiology and cleared that out. It's like, always makes you appreciate that much more the utility that we have in this tiny instrument that only takes 2 seconds to use. So now back to the patient side of things. When folks are coming in and you're scanning this thing on the back of their neck and you're looking at it and you're comparing it and they're wondering, what does this show? What is going on? What am I supposed to think about this? How do you talk to folks about what you're doing there?
Sure. So when it comes to patient education, again, your first few visits with the patient, it's about keeping it short, sweet, and simple. You want to get straight to the point, connect the subluxation to their area of complaint, right? You can't just say, I've got a subluxation, it's bad for your body, your innate intelligence is disconnected, but it has nothing to do with your condition. They'll say, thanks, doc, that sounds great, I'll see you next time. So first and foremost, when we do that scan of the spine, regardless of where their problem is, right there, this test indicates you have a subluxation that's causing nerve pressure leading to your condition. Now, this scan right here picks up the heat given off by those hot nerves. Anytime there's pressure on those nerves because the bones are out of place, the nerve gets hot, and it's going to form a very consistent heat pattern. So when I scan you with this in future visits, this lets us know actually if the adjustment from last time stayed in place and you're getting better, or if it went back out of alignment for whatever reason, your body's getting worse and another adjustment is clinically necessary at that point. So that's kind of the key term we'll use, is clinical necessity, rather than just, oh, I feel like you need to be adjusted. I think you need to be adjusted.
Yeah.
The test indicates it, right? I'm removing myself from that human subjective equation. I'm literally nothing more than a technician who pulled a button and heard 2 beeps. Scan to the base of the occiput, and then here's what it says. So it's not me telling her that, it's a test telling her that. Like, it's just like an MRI saying you got a squeezed disc at C5 hitting your C5 nerve root.
Mm.
Well, it's no longer the doctor thinking that that shoulder pain going down to your arm is a radicular pain, right? It's the doctor knowing now because the test indicates it. So it raises your level of value to the patient and your level of clinical confidence when you present yourself to have this test right there. We live in a digital computerized age, you know,
Yep.
and to think that we have this technology in our practice and chiropractors aren't using it just because, well, my technique doesn't call for it, it's ludicrous to me. Patients need to see stuff like this. And if we have it, which we do, use it. Patients love being able to know that there's something wrong when they come in, that there is a reason for their problem. Because how many patients have you had yourself that have been to emergency rooms, medical doctors, physical therapists, even other chiropractors, and they said there's nothing wrong with you?
Mm.
They come to your office, you check them, and you've got an upper cervical subluxation. It's not me saying that, it's your test indicating it. So it's just keeping it short, simple, and pointing out their condition is caused by that subluxation. And they're going to start seeing in subsequent visits with each scan, yep, my pattern's back. Oh, doc, looks like my head's not on straight. Got to get adjusted.
There
Or,
you
yeah,
go.
I got a clear reading today. Everything's great. Wonderful. We'll see you next time.
Great. Yeah, it's and shout out to Roger and Dr. Hoskins and the crew at Titronics. They do a great job of supporting, all the chiropractic communities that are involved. And I really appreciate their customer support, the technology that they have available to us. It really is a no-brainer in my opinion. And it's so funny. I don't know if you've had this. Sometimes patients will say things like, I guess maybe because I'm younger, this must be the newest, most advanced thing in chiropractic. I can, all this different stuff. And, we always have this conversation. Well, it's funny you mentioned that because this is one of the only things that's been around for almost 100 years and has stood the test of
Yeah,
time with all the different things that have come and gone and
sure.
was, potentially developed to be the gold standard of chiropractic care. And it's, an interesting observation on the part of patients, like you mentioned earlier, when they have an opinion about or a perspective about what chiropractic is,
Mm-hmm.
and then they approach something a little bit differently, and the use of technology and diagnostic equipment to be able to monitor progress over time and keep the chiropractor accountable to their results.
Exactly.
So excellent.
Yeah, I think patients really get a value for that. And you'll see that with the patients that stick around with you, especially the ones that come from the general full spine world or other techniques that don't use any instrumentation. It's just find the high bump and mash it type of technique,
Yeah.
They really get a value for that you use this instrument.
And for those of you that are watching on YouTube or the video portion of this is available. This is from Colonel Allen's particular case. You'll see they do provide the scans and the scans over time. And what you'll notice is they're not all perfectly straight. And there is an explanation of what's going on over time, as those changes are occurring, along with the patient's other testing, as well as, his symptomatic feedback and the full clinical picture of what's going on. And there are other cases in here as well. So you can use that to sort of wrap your head around, what this pattern concept is all about, what changes are observed over time, and Dr. Palmer's thought process as these cases were going through a trial of care there at the B.J. Palmer Clinic, and there were not a lot of adjustments happening during those times. And Dr. Allen's one adjustment that lasted that long had a tremendous amount of survival value attached with it.
Definitely.
Doc, as we start to wrap up here, we really appreciate you joining our little Blair family and community here and sort of connecting the two podcasts there. Thank you for the work that you're doing. I think it's really interesting. It's really cool. It's super valuable. And I hope that our folks will find that to be the case too. So I'd encourage you all that are listening to go find the Green Book Commentaries podcast, subscribe, get connected with Dr. Plesa, send him some feedback, let him know what you like. What you want to hear next. I mean, volume 25 eventually is going to come to a conclusion. So what would you like to hear next in the Green Book Commentaries podcast? And continue to check out the Blair Technique podcast for more information regarding the philosophy, science, and art of the things that we all have in common. As BJ used to sign and saying all these different things, we love you because you love the things we love. We find a lot of common ground with the folks that have more in common than different. So we appreciate our folks in the knee chest community. Hope to connect with you all sooner than later at conferences and seminars and such. But are there any other last minute thoughts that you'd like to share with folks regarding chiropractic philosophy? Maybe we have a lot of younger docs and students that listen. Any advice or things that you'd like to share with them from your years of practice experience, just as we start to wrap up for today?
Absolutely. Two things that I always share with upcoming chiropractic generations is the two things that help me the most. To have a successful practice, you have to have two techniques. One is your chiropractic technique, and you have got to dedicate your life, your whole professional career to mastering it, to being the absolute best that you can be at it. You may not be the best in the world at that technique, but you need the best that you can be personally, that your body can deliver, and you're going to get fantastic results with patients. This is where your satisfaction comes from at the end of the day, knowing that you're doing your job right. This is where your reward comes at the end of your career, knowing that you lived a life well lived, helping hundreds, thousands of families get well from subluxation so they can live the life they want to live that otherwise they wouldn't have been able to live. Your chiropractic technique, you have to be good at it. And that's the only thing that's going to help you overcome that hump right there. The second thing that I recommend to everybody, even maybe before you decide your chiropractic technique, is to find your chiropractic management system, a practice technique system. I'm not going to name any names. There's plenty out there, but you need to look. Our chiropractic teaching institutions, our colleges are great at helping us pass our test, kind of get a general understanding of what chiropractic is and get us through national boards. However, that's pretty much where they stop. And to really build a successful practice, you have to do a lot more schooling outside of school.
Yeah.
I dedicated 3 years of practice management, so almost another chiropractic institution teaching time of almost 4 more years to learning how to do proper practice management. So that's definitely my advice for the next generation coming out. Be a master at your adjusting technique and become a master at your practice management technique. The best chiropractor, if you can't get patients into practice, it means nothing, right? Because you got a whole subluxated world out there that you haven't been able to convince the value of chiropractic of coming in. And you're not going to get that from your adjusting technique. So definitely make sure you find a balance between your chiropractic technique of adjusting and analyzing subluxation and reaching out to patients who are subluxated, how to get them into your office, and then how to keep them in your office for lifetime care. And you're going to have a healthy practice, a successful career, and you're going to get more sick people well than you could imagine.
Excellent. And one of my favorite quotes of Dr. Blair's was, "Be specific, be scientific, render only quality care to the patient, and you'll be rewarded bountifully." So I think we could end on that note. And Dr. Plesa, appreciate you making the time for us, carving it out, and hope that folks find a lot of value in the work that you're doing. I know that I have, and I think that our community will love it. So thanks for all your hard work and dedication and doing what I call putting points on the scoreboard for chiropractic.
Thank you, Dr. Stenberg. It's a pleasure and an honor, and we definitely thank you for what you're doing with your podcast. I believe we're all a bunch of boats in the big ocean of chiropractic, and when one of us rise, we all rise. So I'm definitely here to support anybody and anybody who is chiropractic subluxation based, and definitely look forward to connecting with you in the future.
Great. Thanks so much.